what we can do is we can create adjustments to this that are going to be a mixture of destructive and non-destructive. And so when we're going to be adjusting this image, we're going to use tools like noise reduction, and that's going to be a non-destructive function. And when we're looking at when we're looking at adjustments that are going to be like removing the actual, sort of dots in our image and actually going through and repairing our image independently of that, those things are going to be destructive adjustments. And so we'll talk about these as we go through individually, which elements are destructive, which elements you can get back, and which elements you can't. So that being said, something that we want to do, so this is going to be, we're going to be creating this change to our image in edit mode. Okay. We're going to be using layers. Layers is key to this. This is not doable in this case, or not doable to the same degree that we're going to be exploring without. So what I'm going to do to start is create a duplicate of this image. And a duplicate of this image is what ultimately what this is going to do is it's going to enable me to work within this image and still keep the original within my layer panel. Because like I said, there's going to be some destructive changes to this image, some hard changes that I can't quote unquote get back through the process of undoing them or adjusting their sort of specific editing sliders, that sort of thing. I do need like an original copy of this image. Now, you don't necessarily need this in the sense that you might know exactly what you're doing and what you want to do, and you want to save this image in the end, and you don't need anything, the original copy. But I just like to get people into the habit of duplicating their image when they're making destructive adjustments. So what I will have you do is right click on your image, or you can go down to the little button at the bottom here that says duplicate layer. And what that does is it creates a carbon copy of your image. And I'm also going to rename these just so we can, let's just go original for our bottom layer here. And then we can rename this layer. This is going to be the one where, excuse me, that we're going to apply something called frequency separation. And forgive my spelling. When we have this frequency separation layer, we're going to apply frequency separation to this image. Just out of curiosity, generally speaking, how many are you familiar with the concept of frequency separation in ACDSee? Not familiar or familiar? I just want to get a show of hands in regards to that. Somewhat no. Most people are not, it looks like. Okay, this is going to be this is going to be pretty mind-blowing to you. And for those of you that are somewhat familiar, I think this is going to be very familiar, very helpful as well. So one of the things I'm also going to do before we start the process of frequency separation is I'm going to apply a noise reduction to our layer. So I'm going to add a noise reduction adjustment layer. And that is going to be essentially placed over top of our frequency separation layer that we're going to apply. Most of the edits that we're going to be doing today that are manual and destructive edits are going to be done on these frequency separation layers. And we'll explain why momentarily. But the thing we want to do from a base level right now is we just want to apply a noise reduction, because this image, if I zoom in, you can see the amount of film grain and dust scratches and that sort of thing that appear on the image. And most of these would be way too ponderous to remove by hand. This would take too long. So what we're going to do is we're going to add that noise reduction layer and it'll be placed on the top of our layer order. And what we're going to do is we're actually just going to increase our luminance. And you can see as I increase my luminance, most of those scratches will disappear. Is that visible to you? So let's see if I can show a before and after. And so what when you increase luminance, what ACDSee tries to do, right, is it tries to preserve the detail in terms of sort of broad strokes of your image. And what it attempts to do is sort of maintain and hold strong lines while enabling you to get rid of grain that exists in between it. So I'm going to increase this. I might actually just increase this all the way So the thing about this that's worth exploring too and seeing is that the actual shape of our image doesn't change. The areas where there's darkness, where in the example of this person's arm, the sort of shadow beneath that, all of that doesn't go away. What it does is it sort of tries to reduce that particulate detail. And so I'm going to just increase this, and we might start with a very exaggerated one. And when we zoom out, you'll see the difference between the before and after. So if I look at before, you can see all that film grain. Hopefully that's seeable to everyone in the audience, but there's essentially blue film grain. Most of that is appearing over top of the gentleman's jacket. And then when I hold and remove that, you can see that much of that detail is either sort of dulled or removed. And this is key. This is something that we're going to want to use to remove actual film noise, which is exactly what we're doing in this case. This is a pretty good example of film noise. This is also a pretty good example of, these situations where there are blue spots that are actually going to be removed within this process. And this is non-destructive. So what I mean by that is when I save this, actually, so Peter had said, always keep your original image. You can guarantee the processing programs available will get better. And this is so true. When we save this image, what we're going to do is we're going to save as, let's do this right now, actually. And we're going to save this image as an ACDSee file format. This ACDSee file format is going to be much larger than a flattened layer. But what it's going to offer you, and this is very important, is the ability to edit these sort of non-destructive layers. So if I save this as, let's just say, image restoration, save it as an ACDSee file, what's going to come up is the ability to edit this image in the future. So yeah, we haven't quite got there, Peter, yet, but we will. So that gives me the ability to, quote unquote, open up this image in the future because it's an ACDSee file. And now I can sort of edit things as I see fit later on. And note that this is a distinct image, obviously, because we have saved as. It's a distinct image from our original, which means that our original is preserved over here. But because we actually duplicated our image within our image restoration layer, sort of in the beginning here, not only is that original preserved as a file, but now the original is preserved as a file in our layer order. So you can see that when I hide the frequency separation layer and hide the noise reduction layer, that my original image is displayed to us, which includes all of that film grain. To add noise reduction is to simply click on the noise reduction adjustment layer, which appears beneath the layer order. So as you can see here, there's these adjustment layers. So adjustment layers, by their very nature, are non-destructive, provided that you're saving your file as an ACDSee file. So you can always come back to these in the future and make adjustments, okay? Okay, now to answer the question that is, what is a frequency separation? What are we doing when we apply this? So our general noise reduction application is at the top of our layer order, which means it's the first adjustment we see. Then we have our frequency separation layer, which is the copied or duplicated version of our original layer. And this is the one that we're actually going to be editing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on my image and I'm going to go down to this tool frequency separation. So frequency separation is going to split my image into two separate qualities, two separate images, essentially. So what it does is it turns my image into a texture layer and a color layer. So if I can draw your attention to the left here, you're going to see the layer previews for something called high frequency and low frequency. And there's this little modal icon, the little dot here, that indicates indicates the sort of what the save of this high frequency and low frequency layer are going to look like. When we click done, both of these layers are essentially split. So it splits our image into two layers. So you don't get to choose whether or not you're keeping a high frequency layer or a low frequency layer. What it does is you get to choose the settings by which both are applied to your image. So high frequency and low frequency. So Low frequency is called a low pass layer, and it generally, the appearance of it is to you is it contains more color data. And so what we're seeing when we look at this low frequency layer is we're seeing a saturation of color. We're not necessarily seeing the texture that comes with those high points, those black and white points on our image. High frequency or a high pass layer is showcasing us that textural data. And essentially what ACDSee is doing when it does this is it's splitting it into two separate images so we can edit these things independently. You can, if you'd like, adjust the blur radius. So the blur radius is going to change the relationship of, of your image here. This is unnecessary. Your automatic settings will probably be good in most situations, but you can adjust the blur radius. And what that will do is it's going to change not only the appearance of the high pass layer, but also the low pass layer when we go prior to clicking done to adjust these settings. So let's just do this. We're going to, we have our high frequency. This is what it looks like. This is a preview of it. We have our low frequency. We have our low pass layer. This is what it looks like. What I'm going to do is I'm going to click done. And what it's going to do is it's now going to create those layers. So let's have a look at those layers. So what we were looking at earlier in the preview menu is now represented to us. So let's hide the noise reduction. Let's hide the original. So we have the frequency separation layer, which is added to our layer order. And we have the frequency separation layer that's the low pass, and it's also added to our layer order. Can everybody see that that is sort of added to our layer order here, and that they have an indication, HF and LF? This is a pretty cool tool, and you might be thinking, oh, why would I want to use this? So in your image, this gives you the ability to interact with qualities independently of the image itself. And what it does is it reduces error when you go to make blur adjustments, repair adjustments. So when I was learning about this tool to begin with, this was about 4 years ago when this was added to ACDSee. One of the things that came up that was a recommendation for using frequency separation was to get rid of facial blemishes. And so Tony, who's one of our developers, had showcased to me, he applied this frequency separation layer on a person who had facial blemishes. You know what I mean by that is like zits, that sort of thing. And the idea was that you could use frequency separation to blur the redness around the zits in with the sort of general color of the face. And then what you could use is you could use the high pass layer, sort of this tonal layer that you see here, the texture, to actually remove the sort of outline of the dot that appears. And so what this gives you is, because you're interacting with one part that's texture and one part that's the color in this case, it sort of splits the process in two and reduces the room for error, or the room for like obvious signs that you've edited your image. Really strong tool. And so what we're doing is we're applying that same theory, but we're applying it to an image that has film grain, right? And other sort of visual issues. So let's draw your attention to the actual image itself, and we'll talk about what we're going to start to do to our image. One of the probably the most common elements of this, or the most clear disruptions to this image, is that that looks like it's either a hair or some sort of long scratch in the center of the image. And this is something that we can remove in using ACDSee, and by specifically interacting with these high pass layers and low pass layers. So we'll address that, and then we're going to come back to the jacket here, and we'll actually remove all of these little independent little dots that appear over top of the jacket in both the low pass layer and the high pass layer. And what this is going to do is this is going to sort of very subtly remove these elements and sort of give this image the appearance of it looking like a brand new image. So What I'm going to do now is we'll keep the noise reduction on top on. That's fine. What this is doing is it's basically just getting rid of all of the stuff that would be too laborious to remove by hand. So we're going to leave that on top. And what we're going to do is we're going to hide the high pass layer. So that we're going to hide this right now, and we're going to start with the bottommost layer, which in this case is the low pass layer. Can everybody see that the low pass layer, the color layer is selected? What we're going to do is we're going to remove this little line. And as you can see, the line here looks different than the combination of it with the high pass layer turned on. So this is functionally what we're removing within the low pass layer. And in the high pass layer, it's going to be something completely different. So low pass layer selected. Let's now go to repair tool. So I'm going to click on the repair tool section here, which is the filter menu. The filter menu is destructive. So note that when I'm making adjustments to this low pass layer and this high pass layer, these are destructive adjustments. These are final adjustments. And this is why earlier I suggested to you to save, or rather to duplicate your image. So I'm going to go to the repair tool. And we can try a combination of blended clone or smart erase in this area and just see what works best. So let's start with smart erase and just see if smart erase does a good job. Smart erase is essentially like an automated method by which it can look around for pixels of similar colors to sort of adjust that part of our image. So if I select this, if I draw a red line over top of it, it's going to, in this case, do a pretty poor job right here. So let's try again with a slightly larger nib width, and then we can try a slightly smaller nib width and see if we can get, because this is an automated function, we might need to use the blended clone tool, but we can try and play around to see if we can get, oh, yeah, that's actually really good. So I needed a smaller nib width using the smart erase tool to get rid of that. And if I wanted within the blur, I can sort of blur out a little bit of the extra area that appears right here. But overall, this was a good way of sort of removing the line within that color layer. So all I did here was click on smart erase, and then I just removed that line by drawing over top of it. In this case, trying to draw over top of as little of that line as possible while still maintaining a sort of a total coverage. Let's see here. We can click done for a moment now. And what we're going to do is we're going to take this same layer, the low pass layer, the layer that we just opened. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to open this in the blur tool now. And the reason why we want to do that is because this color layer is very conducive to blurring out these other dots areas on our image. Blur would not have worked for this large line that appeared right here. And the reason why is because there's just too much area that is affected by it. So it would have been maybe disruptive to the image to try to blur that out, which is why we sort of used a smart erase, or we could use something like the blended clone tool to do that. So what I'll do is I'll click on blur here. Okay, so when you use the blur filter, the automatic preset is to just apply the blur tool to the whole image. Naturally, we don't want this. So what we're going to do is we're going to click on the edit brush, and the edit brush will actually feature the ability to use a Gaussian blur on specific parts of our image rather than universally being applied to our image. The Gaussian blur amount is what is changed over top of our image. So if I click on the brush tool, I'll just keep my nib setting really low. And then I'm just going to go around finding any area of my image that I actually want to blur out. This is useful. You can see which parts of your images are changed when you use the scroll bar. So it'll showcase briefly to you what parts you've altered. And I'm just looking over top of this gentleman's jacket for any parts of my image that I think look like that film grain. And if I zoom out, you can see that the color portion of this layer, the sort of the grain details that appeared, let's see if I can show a previous, with those little dots, has now been erased. I might actually clean this up. Let's see if I can. I actually don't like the appearance of that. So let's see if I can undo this. There we go. Just undo beneath it there. Yeah, there we go. So I've just gone through and I've blurred my image using the Gaussian blur tool, which you can see right here. I have the amount set, and I can either increase or decrease this amount to see less of the effect or more of the effect. And as you can see, as I reduce the Gaussian blur, the dots in this case become more visible. I'm just going to keep it in the center here around 123. And then I can click done here. How do you show the image in the bottom right-hand corner? If you can't see the image in the bottom right-hand corner, that means that you're not zoomed in, because I believe when you zoom out, that image is not visible to you. So as soon as you zoom in an extent greater or than I think 100%, then this is what this appears, or lower than 100%. That's probably what I mean. Then that's when it appears. So those blurred elements are removed. And what we can do now is click on done, and we'll have a look at our image independent of that, the high pass layer. So note that this image that we're seeing, okay, doesn't include the actual texture. Okay, so we're seeing a blurred image of our subjects here. But given that we're seeing a blurred image of our subjects, I'm not seeing any film grain on our gentleman's jacket here. So this is what I would describe as an effective alter to this image. And we've sort of removed any of those specks that appeared on the jacket, the lapel jacket here. Yeah, it's looking good. So what we're going to do now is we're going to actually switch, and we're going to start to adjust the high pass layer, which the high pass layer is the layer that contains the texture data, right? So the high pass layer looks like this in comparison. What you might find is that the high pass layer is hard, difficult to edit on its own, independent of a low pass layer. And the reason why is because, as you can see, there's just so little data in these sort of textural spots that it's hard to see. And so what we want to do is we generally want to turn on that low pass layer that we just finished editing, and we're going to edit that layer, the high pass layer now, independently of the low pass layer. So again, we've split this into two, and we're adjusting color on one and texture data on the other. In regards to this sort of scratch that appears in the center, this is sort of color and texture that we're adjusting on both. So let's do that same application. And we will start with, let's start with adjusting that mark that appears in the center here. We can either apply a blended clone or a smart erase to that. And yeah, let's explore it. But the difference here is we want to make sure that the high pass layer, the HF layer, the high frequency layer, is selected. And we're going to go to, once again, the repair tool. And the repair tool is going to be just repairing this layer. So whenever we open up a layer in a filter menu, it's going to be editing the layer that you are selected, or the layer that is highlighted in this case. It will not be editing any other layer. So what the filter doesn't do is it doesn't make a composite of what you see and then allows you to edit that. It literally allows you to edit the layer that is selected. So Clayton said, don't you need to turn off the noise reduction layer? So the reason why I added the noise reduction layer at the beginning, and this is key, is what I don't want to do is edit my image independently of all these scratches. So the whole point of taking this noise reduction layer and applying it to the top of my image is to have less of a focus on sort of these minor scratches that appear, and allows me to focus on, if I highlight it, these major areas where I'm starting to see like large dots appear. So the noise reduction layer over top, what it's actually allowing me to do is twofold. Well, A, it just gets rid of a lot of that minor fuzz that appears on the image, which is ideal. But also what it does is it allows me to focus on the elements of my image that are like larger and are more damaging to the image rather than the sort of general noise that appears over top of it. So we will not be turning this off. And what he went on to say, Clayton said, is, I think I understand that, but if you leave it on while working on the high pass layer, doesn't it make it harder to see the texture data? No. So it leaving this on, or sorry, leaving this off would showcase to me so much texture data that I'm trying not to focus on. So what I'm using this for is to eliminate what I see. So eliminating the areas of my image that I'm trying to omit and I'm focusing on. I'm using this as a tool to focus on the parts of my image that are more destructive. And I will save this image with this noise reduction applied to my image. I mean, overall, I can play with the luminance. I can play with these settings in regards to the noise reduction, but the difference between noise reduction turned on and turned off is really enormous. Now my job is to remove anything that noise reduction can't accommodate, cannot change for me. So once again, let's click on our high pass layer. That's a great question, by the way. Thank you, Clayton. Let's click on our high pass layer and let's address this marking on the high pass layer itself. Okay. I'll go to the repair tool. I think we'll primarily be working with the repair tool for this. We're not going to blur too many of these marks. And what I'm going to do is let's try Smart Erase. If it doesn't work, I will have to make a blended clone. I might do both just to showcase how you can do them. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to just really zoom in on this and really try to do a good job of selecting just this scratch. And let's see how it does. Yeah, so doesn't a very good job. So that would be what that would look like, is if we zoom in on our Smart Erase. And I think the key here for Smart Erase is that you want what it does. Yeah, I'm going to clean that up. But what a Smart Erase does is it's looking around the area that you select, right? And what it's going to do is it's going to determine, so there's the area that you're trying to replace, which is the place that is selected, right? And then there's the area that you are trying to you're essentially inferring from. So the area that the Smart Erase is going to replace is the ones that exist around the outline of that image, or outline of that selection. I think that did a pretty good job. I mean, there's clearly some adjustments I need to make here, but let's just try the blended clone tool to give an example of that. So what the blended clone tool does, it's a combination of both heal and clone if you've never used it before. And so what you do is you select a portion of your image, in this case, the texture, as you can see here, and you apply it to a secondary part of your image. And so this allows you to sort of move elements along. So if I was to select this portion of my image here, and I could replace it there, this portion of my image here and replace it there. And essentially what I'm doing is I'm taking an area that I want to apply a heal and clone function to, and then I can click elsewhere and have that effect be applied. And so you can see that when I do that, it's sort of getting a similar result to that of the Smart Erase function. Peter asked, why does Smart Erase not pick up the fine detailed dust that was on the original? So Peter, when we're seeing what we're seeing right now, we're seeing it still with the noise reduction application existing over top of it. So why it's not picking that up is because that noise reduction layer is still working to sort of apply its effects over top of it. Would clone with feathering work as well? Yeah, there's a million different ways to get this. I'm just sort of showcasing methods. But Tom, like, you could apply heal or cloning and sort of see what that looks like and just play with it on your own. Like, again, so the reason why I've selected blending clone or Smart Erase in this area Smart Erase is good for removing, blemishes that I can't remove with data that I can infer. So like with the blended clone, I'm inferring on locations of my image that I can use as a reference to copy. But maybe in some situations, like you don't have anything to copy and to blend in an area. This can be the case for oddly placed hands and things like that. So just play around with these functions. You absolutely could use clone or heal in these areas. Clone takes a part of your image and literally copies and pastes it, right? Which is super useful for getting rid of these blemishes. So I could use that instead of the blended clone tool, or instead of the Smart Erase tool. So I'm going to go through and I'm just going to quickly go through and replace those. I'm going to look at this image and I'm going to try to replace as many of these blemishes as I can. And I'm just going to use the blended clone tool in this case to do that. I'm going to focus on these sort of larger marks. Let's see here. You can sort of follow me as I go. This might take a minute, so just give me a sec while I do this. Alex asked, how do you zoom the area of the blended clone or other tool in and out? So the nib width, I think, is what you're referring to, Alex. And you can see that there's a nib slider that appears here. The other thing too is if your mouse has a scroll wheel, you can scroll it up or down using the scroll wheel, but it's equivalent to actually just moving this with your mouse as well. Does that answer your question, Alex? Hopefully it does. I'm just going to go through, I'm going to blend out these elements, start to get rid of as many of these blemishes on my image as possible, within reason. Obviously, I can't remove everything. That would be okay. Awesome. As long as that makes sense to you, Alex. How am I zooming in and out of the image? Okay, to zoom in and out of the image, you can use the zoom function right here. Or what you can do is you can hold spacebar to move throughout your image. This is scrubbing. And what you can also do is you can hold control, okay, and use your scroll wheel. And what that will do is it'll zoom in and out of your image, provided that control is held. Does that answer your question, Gary? Awesome. Yeah, so we're just going to use a mixture of the scrub tool, holding spacebar to move about my image. And then I'm also going to zoom in and out using that control function that I just told Gary about. This doesn't have to be perfect. The point of this, especially when we're zoomed in this far, this detail is so fine. So when we zoom out on our image, a lot of this will be sort of negligible. But our point here is to really focus on elements like this one, right? Which are quite a bit larger and are ugly to the eye. And so we're going to go through and we're going to edit this. And we're just going to right click on an area we like and left click on an area we don't like. And that's basically the process. Clayton, send me an email. I'll send it to our developers. So Clayton was pointing out something he wanted to see in the software. And one of the things that I always do is I send emails to our developers with any suggestions that people have in the workshops. And there's lots of suggestions that come by, come to me. The nice thing about emailing me is because I am I can just direct that exact critique to our head developers, and they know that it's coming from a workshop, so they do consider that. When they make adjustments to ACDSee, primarily what they do is they essentially add it to a list, right? And the list that has the most items that people want, like the most suggestions, are the ones that get that see action in regards to the new product. However, there's also small adjustments that are made to the product every year, and that they sort of look at and prioritize as well. So I'm going to click done here. because we've gone through and we've used the blended clone tool to remove any like larger blemishes on my image. And as you can see, this image is pretty clean in comparison to the original that we saw. So we'll click done. I might add a small sharpen adjustment at the very top. Let's see here. And then just to accommodate for a slight noise reduction adjustments, just anything there that we didn't like. I'll just adjust this until like the radius a little bit. The sharpen adjustment is being applied just above the noise reduction. Let's see that. That's pretty good. And so if we look at this image in comparison to our original image, I mean, it's substantially different. What I might do right now is I might actually just save this while I have it. So I've already saved this as an ACDSee file, which means I can just click save and it'll be, those adjustments will be added to that save file. And while that happens, Photoshop allows you to zoom in and out of the image using the scroll wheel. That's a function I miss in ACDSee. Well, I'll try the control and scroll. Lots of those functions, Gary, are in ACDSee. The difference is that like we have different keys for them. It's worth exploring in the like it's worth exploring what the sort of the short keys are for things. What's the term I'm forgetting in this moment? Hotkeys. The hotkeys are for certain things, because a lot of stuff will surprise you that it does exist in ACDSee. It's just hotkey differently than it was in Photoshop, which might not be helpful to you. Maybe you're like, I need it to be the same, but it's worth exploring and checking out in regards to that. So here's our finished product. So we have a very different image that was you know, than our starting image. So let's compare the two by hiding all of the layers. So this represents what we saw to begin with. This is the image that we started with. And you can see that the sort of the major scratches are removed in this case. And then as we add these individual layers, you can see what the adjustments look like. So here's the low pass layer and the high pass layer, independent of that noise reduction. So this is without any noise reduction applied. So here's with that noise reduction applied, and then finally with the sharpness. Tom asked, could you have gotten rid of the dust scratches without using frequency separation? Yes, you could have. I'm not clearly seeing the advantage of using frequency separation for this. Okay. So the reason why I'm showcasing you frequency separation, right, is because this method, Tom, is way more foolproof than adjusting the starting image on its own. And what I'm suggesting to you is this gives you so much fine-grained control over the original image that you wouldn't have if you were just editing the original. Now, honestly, at the end of the day, it's up to you, and you could be excellent at sort of restoring images. You might know a lot of the processes. What I'm trying to do is provide a way that allows users to adjust their image that doesn't have so much focus on creating like sweeping destructive changes to their image, that sort of focuses in on a method that they can sort of use to split this image into sort of groups and work independently. And and I don't think in general this adds too much time to editing the image. I think what it does give them is A, greater control, and B, a bit of forgiveness when it comes to adjusting certain elements. Yeah. And like, again, there's so many ways to restore images. If you know of a way that works for you that isn't using frequency separation, by all means, please. I just think for a standpoint of an introductory workshop to sort of restoring images, this is the method I suggest. Alex Snyder asked, is it possible to enhance the green of the shrubbery? Yeah, we can add a little vibrance adjustment if that's what you mean by enhance. I can increase the saturation of the greens. Actually, you know what? Let's do this differently. Let's go to color EQ, go to hue. I could go in and I could sort of increase saturations of the greens in the background. You can see those greens are slightly brighter now. I could sort of change the hue of those greens to more of a blue or more yellowy. In that regard, I can increase their brightness. so slightly brighter. So you can see that they pop a little bit more. Got to be careful with these things. And the reason why is because your image universally contains greens, reds, and blues. So you might be adjusting other parts of your image that you're not intending to, but that gives you a quick little color cue before and after with that adjustment. Doc asked, it's actually a function of the control mouse wheel zooms in and out almost all apps. Yeah, so fair enough. Bob asked, can you remove what looks like a light ray coming in the bottom right? This one right here, that's a great question. Could I have? This is quite hard to remove. And that's the other thing that's worth exploring too, is not everything is going to be adjustable. Can I remove that? I can probably remove it on the jacket because there's so little detail in this area. This area, I think, is going to be where the challenge lies. Now, if we sort of close all these layers, I think we can see without a shadow of a doubt that this is just being affecting the frequency layer, so the low pass layer, and not the high pass layer. Yeah, there's virtually no markings here that indicate that. So let's see. Let's play around. So I don't think blur is going to work on this layer, but what we could do, you know what, let's try it. Let's try blurring this part right here, and then let's see what we can do. So this is obviously the easier part, okay? So we have our low pass layer, which is the layer that contains the color. And we can go to the blur section here, and we can go to the brush, and you can very clearly, I think, Gaussian blur out some of this blue here. Let's see, maybe I want to apply a slightly greater effect there. There we go. The hand is going to be difficult. That might not work in this space. I might want to remove slightly some of that and just continue to increase elsewhere. That's not as subtle as I was hoping. It works right here, but it might require a blended clone function right here. So let's try that. So once again, we're going to go into low pass. We're going to go into the repair tool, and we can try to use the blended clone to, or maybe like a, yeah, we'll try to use the blended clone here to sort of see what we can get. I don't like the appearance of that. Maybe just a straight up clone. Yeah, that might be the only way to work through this. See, this is going to have a really hard edge to it, which means you really need to be tight with the adjustment. And this might require us to blend a little bit after to see if we can get there's way too strong of an edge here. But let's see. Yeah, this tool doesn't have a feathering function. That's a good suggestion, though. As you can see, there's no feathering. Where did all those fibers come from? So when we zoomed into our image, these were what were removed. There we go. I think that might be just some form of blending here. Let's have a look at it. This might not work. The lines themselves, actually, that's fine. Now I'm looking at it. Yeah, there's a little bit of a halo there, but it's pretty negligible. So that would maybe how I'd look at removing that section. Oops. I think this bottom section here, that's going to represent a really tough part. And the reason why is because there's so much granular detail in here that you could probably apply a similar methodology going through using the blended clone tool and just sort of go through and remove the parts where it's black, right? This is just going to take a long time. And, that's the thing about restoring images is not everything is going to be an immediate function. I think the reason what I wanted to show you here is sort of looking at the elements of your image that can be adjusted quickly and effectively. In this case, using things like noise reduction and then using frequency separation to reduce larger film grain. These like broad swaths of like light that appear here, this is going to be a lot harder to remove. It's also something too that we could explore going in and selectively adjusting blue and moving it, like reducing the saturation of that blue. That might be something you could apply in that area. And I guess what I mean by that is if I say, how would I show you this to you? Could add a vibrance adjustment above our low pass layer on a mask. And then we could set the mask to black. And then we could paint white, which turns that mask on in this area. And then we could sort of play around with these tools. This is pretty advanced. I'm not suggesting that one does this, but you could reduce the saturation maybe, reduce the lightness, and that's somewhat removing it. There we go. There we go. That's about as good as I think I'm getting. I mean, it would take a lot more time than I'm showcasing to you, but that's a fairly good way of maybe addressing some of that, just on face value. If we're looking at that, it's clear that this area has been edited, which means that it needs more help, right? But for a workshop and for a 5-minute question, I think that's it's not bad. Let's kind of look back at some of these previous questions. Okay. Okay, and so we got rid of that. Okay, nice. So Jean asked, how'd you remove their streaks? So that answered Jean's question as well. Is there any way to sharpen the facial details? You can sharpen the facial details even more, Gail, by creating a new sharpness layer. So I could add one more sharpness layer to the top here. And what I would do is like I did with that vibrance adjustment, I would turn this mask off, okay? And to do that, what I need to do is I need to invert the mask. And when I invert the mask, this adjustment is applied to nothing on my image. This black indicates that the adjustment, the sharpness adjustment, is turned off. And so what I would do is I would take that and I would paint white on our image here with that mask selected. Again, this is sort of an advanced tool, but just so that I have these 2 dots in my mask. And what this indicates to me is that the sharpness is turned off for everything but the faces in my image. And so then what I could do is I could click on the actual sharpness function of it and increase the strength of that adjustment and play around with the radius until it's stronger. And I can do a really egregious adjustment just so you can see what I mean. But Gail, do you see how that sort of sharpness is now increased just on the faces? Again, I'm not suggesting that this is a good outcome. This is pretty intense, but you can see what I mean. So Gail, let me know if that answers your question. Okay, awesome. I'm glad that answered your question. Again, that wasn't intended to look good, but just intended to answer your question. More time needed on that to sort of adjust it. I might lower the radius and I'd probably spend a bit of time like removing it around the edge of the face because I don't want the sharpness of the face to affect the foliage. Okay, that was Gail's question. Let's see here. Okay, Alex's question is answered. Clayton, if you're going to work on the blue streaks, would you flatten the image first or at least merge down, but not including the original? That's a good point. You could. I mean, again, this comes to workflow, Clayton. I think generally speaking, I try to work in as often as I can in one single file. And the reason why is because I have access to all the adjustments in one place and I don't need to like go into 2 different files to do that. But if you find value in like flattening your image with all of the sort of the noise reduction processes applied and the frequency adjustments applied, and then working on a separate image to address a secondary concern, I think that's a totally legitimate way to do it. Again, it just comes down to workflow, I think. Horatio said, I thought this workshop would explore restoring photos that are missing parts of the image. No, have major cracks in the original photo. Is there a workshop like that? Yes. We did a previous workshop that sort of looked at a much more damaged image, Horatio. That's uncommon. And so the reason why I sort of focused on our image here is because the adjustments that we made to this image are far more common when it comes to older photographs that need adjustment. But if you go to the workshop page, if you go to the workshop playlist, there's 2 previous videos that touch base on this. Let's see here. There's old photo restoration using ACDSee Ultimate, and then there's one where we do a really old one now, where we do restoring an old photograph, and then we colorize another image in a separate workshop. So I think the restoring an old photograph one that that's 41 on our playlist here might incorporate more methods to sort of address parts of the image that have been cut off. I can't quite remember what was covered in this workshop, but I do know that this image was a much further far gone than the one we're using today. Okay. Margot, I clone areas like that all the time, use feathering. Peter said, where did all those fibers come from? I think we answered that earlier. Okay. That covers everything that I wanted to talk about today. Just to summarize what we did talk about. So in ACDSee, when it comes to older images, I recommend using Ultimate in edit mode. And what I recommend doing is utilizing noise reduction to remove blemishes on your image that would take too long to do by hand. And then what I recommend doing is using frequency separation and focusing in on the low pass layer using blur tools, maybe a couple like smart erase or blended clone tools to remove certain elements, and then focusing on the high pass layer and exclusively using repair tools. And using the repair tools that like smart erase, blended clone, and clone to sort of remove those elements. And I like this because it enables us to independently work on texture and color, which removes error, especially when you're starting doing photo restorations and you haven't done many before. I think this gives you really good tools to get a really good product with very little initial know-how in what you're doing in terms of restoring photos. Then we can play around with other tools like we did here. We played around with sharpness to sort of increase the overall sharpness of our image. That's some things like that we lost when we did the noise reduction application. Focusing on this case, removing, we removed we made some vibrancy adjustments in areas that that had some blue streaks. So that was useful in this case. I guess we get rid of them all like we just did by painting the rest of that on. And then finally, we sort of use masks in this case to just sort of selectively increase sharpness in this. But the main takeaways from this workshop are noise reduction and frequency separation with the mixture of Gaussian blur and repair functionality, smart erase, blended clone. Hopefully that gives you a good standing. The workshop is officially over. What I will do is I'll have a look at some of these questions that I missed, and we'll just have a good look at them and answer some of them. But if you got some value out of this, please let me know. If you like the workshop, send me an email. If you have a suggestion or something or a question to answer, my email is aprice@acdsystems.com. I love to hear your feedback in regards to it. What else is there to say? Oh, and just don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, where this will be uploaded in a couple, probably tomorrow, maybe today, actually. We'll see. Let me just send that to you. There you go. Okay, let's have a look at some of these last questions. Workshop's over. Jean-Luc, thank you so much. You're most welcome. The term workflow equals hand wave for me. Workshop was very good. You're most welcome, Horatio. Thank you. Randy, thank you so much. Gary, take care. Thank you. If you have time, any suggestions around dealing with black and white? Peter, when you say black and white, do you mean, are you intending to colorize your image? Can you answer that? I'm just curious what you mean by suggestions from dealing with black and white. Peter Kraft, thank you so much. Dennis, the workshop was very helpful. It introduced a series of very powerful tools. Thank you all so much. You're most welcome. Thank you, Dennis. Sandy and Scott, thank you. Thanks for participating. Yeah, my email once again is aprice@acdsystems.com. That makes sense to me, Norm. It's nice that you have access to that, and also access to like the physical copy. No, the opposite. I have lots of black and white that need similar work. Frequency separation is still going to work for black and white images, Peter. Except the what is contained within the frequency separation layer at the bottom here is going to be like varying levels of saturation, right? And then the frequency separation layer, that's the high pass layer, is going to be represented by like kind of like harder, like closer to firm 0 meaning black, or firm 100 meaning white, or 255, I think that's it. Yeah. So this method absolutely works for black and white images. Tom. Yeah, of course. There's also images that make old images new again. You're welcome, Peter. Can you explain the best way to remove highlights on the lady's face, arm, and man's hand so they're not sticking out? Highlights. Oh, like the curves of the image? Like lowering the curves of the image? Or maybe like increasing a degree of saturation. Yeah, I see what you're saying. See if they might also be, let's see. I mean, we might need to check. They might be washed out. Let's see here. Oops, that's not what I meant to click. Oh, they're pretty high. They're pretty high. So I guess, Horatio, when you have this color here, and these numbers are very close to 255, which means they're like closer to being what would be the term for it? It's pretty washed out. So there's very little I don't know how much you're going to be able to do to that. So if we were to sort of say invert this, so I'm applying a curves adjustment, and then I'm going to draw it on the face and hands. It's not that it can't be restored, it's just that it's more complicated because it's so close to white, right? You can see that I increased it a bit for the face there. When something's like very, very close to white, it has no data to adjust. It's so blown out in this case that there's little you can do. But I just added a curves adjustment, and then what I've done is I've gone in and I've sort of drawn on that area. I'm actually going to remove this curve, and what I'm going to try to do is just pull up this black and pull down this white here. Yeah, they might be a bit blown out, Horatio, in terms of being able to adjust these. Yeah, I'm concerned that basically by adjusting the light in this area, it's going to mess up the rest of the image. His face is totally fine. His arm is fine. It's just that highlight there. And that's sort of a quality of the original image. It would be, if you're going to adjust that, what I would suggest is adding a curves or levels adjustment, and essentially blacking out everything but the element that you want to adjust and trying that. In this case, I'm not stoked on that adjustment. I don't think it's that good. Let's see here. Tony F, could you not use highlight slider to reduce the glare, or is that only in develop mode? Highlight slider. Highlight slider in edit mode. I'm actually not sure which tool you're referring to. Like there's light EQ is maybe what you're thinking of. Light EQ works a bit differently in as an adjustment layer than it does as a filter. Okay, so that's an interesting question. Ian, how do you save a final restored image? Okay, so the first thing you do is you would save your ACDSee image. Okay, so I'm going to save this, make sure that has all the changes held within it. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to save this as another image. So I'm going to save it as a JPEG or some sort of lossy image type. So I go save as once again. And I would save this as a JPEG, and I would say image restoration final. Save that. It says it's going to flatten all the layers. That's fine. I'm okay with that. That's ideal. And then let's go back to, oops. Just hide those. There we go. And then you can see that this final layer is the one that we're seeing here. So let's open up it on view. So you can see the film strip layer image, which is sort of different from the original. So if I was to click these two and compare them, so the original is on the left and the edited version is on the right there, with all of the film grain removed. Yeah, so Ian, just save as another file type. In this case, I've saved it as a JPEG file, and then I can compare the two together. Okay. If there's any other questions, fire them in the Q&A panel, maybe over the chat section there. Yeah, it's a pretty substantial adjustment to the image. Lots of that glare removed. I mean, that's a lot of that the film grain removed in the original image. I would say this is a fairly successful adjustment overall. Okay, so I'll put my oh, sure. Dennis wants to know about the compare. So compare is a function of edit mode, or sorry, manage mode, Dennis. And so I have my two images here. There's just this little icon down the bottom. It's called compare images. It's the one with the two pictures sort of next to each other. And what it does, it just brings up a mode for you to look at them side by side. And you can actually open up multiple images together. So I could open up like 10 different images and compare them. You can sort of see the layout functions up at the top here. Does that answer your question, Dennis? Awesome. Okay, we've been going an hour and 10 minutes. So I think this is a good time to stop. I'm going to mute my mic now. I'm going to I'll put my details in the chat once again so people have access to that. I'd like to thank everyone for participating. I really appreciate it. And I hope you have a great rest of your day. Take care.